I'd like to congratulate you all for after 2 hours and 10 minutes. It was quite challenging and going to be challenging for me. I'm a university professor, and I will start with a story that happened to me a couple of months ago. One of my students fell asleep in one of my lectures, so I kindly asked his fellow, can you please wake him up? He says, no, you put him to sleep, you're going to wake him up. So hopefully after 2 hours, I'm not going to put you into sleep. I'll try to be brief. I got 15 minutes. Hopefully I'll be within the time frame. The topic of my presentation is protecting soft targets, and I'll try to argue the case of sporting events. Luckily, my colleagues talked a little bit about that, and I was preparing my presentation a couple of weeks ago. As you all know, the theme of our conference is understand the present and prepare for the future. However, I will argue that history is very important. We've got a history professor here that argued the same thing. And 5 or 6 days ago, it was 47 years to the Munich massacre in 1972. And I don't know how many of you saw the tweet by Associated Press. And the Associated Press, and I would like to quote here, just stated, I'm reading it from their sites. Now they deleted it, but they said on September 5th, 1972, the Palestinian group Black September attacked the Israel Olympic delegation in the Munich Olympic Games, killing 11 Israeli and a police officer. German forces killed 5 of the gunmen. One of the reasons I'm mentioning that, because I was reading the tweets and the retweets, and one of the one who commentating on that tweet said, in 50 years from now, bin Laden will be seen as a freedom fighter for the Middle East. So I'll be talking about the present and about the future, but we need to still remember the history is a story. It's not just his story, but many other stories as well. One of the questions we are all thinking or questioning whether we live in the best of the worlds or the worst of the world, whether it's utopia or dystopia. And I'm giving the example of Charles Dickens between The Tale of Two Cities. And the reason I'm asking myself whether the era that we are living is the best of all eras, and obviously as relating to terrorism, because we all know or familiar with terror attacks, and we just saw, we heard a few examples of those, but we're not really familiar with, I would argue, more than 99% of the attacks that have been forced, and fortunately, nothing has happened. And I would like to talk a little bit about that, because terror in sport is very interesting case. High-profile sporting events. We are talking about the Olympics, the football tournaments, cricket matches. They're all being targeted regularly, almost every day. The counter-terrorism operations are very interesting and unique, and I would like to talk a little bit about that. As very similar to Professor Schmid, I'm an academic. I'm writing about that. There's a few examples of my work about global terror and sports. I'm really happy that I haven't got lots of examples to give you in that respect. My last edited volume of the American Behavioral Scientist talk about terrorism and sport global perspective, and I'll try to get into that perspective right away. But the main questions we all been asking, why sport is such a lucrative or such a attractive prize for terrorists. So naturally, due to their iconic value, their visibility, we talked about 4 billion people watching sporting event, now large crowds that attract people to the venue. That naturally why sport is so attractive. But they also have national culture and symbolic, thus very quality targets. But I would argue that sporting events serves as a meeting point for human emotion, and not just such emotion. stadium usually uniting people from different parts of society. And targeting such an event could be very attractive to terrorists. Although when you're looking at sporting, and as a sports sociologist usually, I'm arguing that you need to look at sports into quite different perspective. Obviously, one is the uniting people that love sports and try to compete in peaceful environment. The other is quite a dividing factor. I remember when I went to Glasgow and see the green versus blue, the Catholic versus Protestant. And the first question I've been asked when I entered the stadium was, "Are you Catholic or a Catholic or a Protestant?" I said, "Don't you worry, guys, I'm a Jewish." And the second question they asked me, "Yeah, but a Catholic Jew or a Protestant Jew?" So in many respects, when you enter a sporting stadium, you eventually take one of the sides. So sports is an intersection of emotion, identities, and demand, and where society and state is interacting, we can all understand why sport is such an attractive target. But I would like to get into a point that unfortunately is not enough emphasized in that respect, and talk about a little bit about the victory of terror, because we all know when we are presenting the Olympics. Professor Friedman gave us the example of the 1996 in Atlanta. Unfortunately, there was a bomb as well over there. We're mentioning the Munich in 1972. But there are other winnings that not so many people are being aware of. And one of such winnings is having the event canceled. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the rally Paris-Dakar, from France to Senegal. Now it's just Dakar. But in 2008, and that is one of the world leading sporting events, it was canceled because the organizer was afraid from Al-Qaeda. And that's one of the example. Obviously, lots of sporting events have been postponed because of terror threats or relocated. I just want to give you a brief example of the African Nation Cup. Just a couple of months ago, I don't know how many of you knows, but it was eventually took place in Egypt. But it was originally should be held in Cameroon. They just moved it. They say it was because of financial problems, but it was security. So when I'm talking about sorts of victory, it's not just what happened when bombs get off. Obviously, that's the worst case scenario, but there are other scenarios as well. So I would like to go to the future and try to be sort of magician and try to predict what's the future holds. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult, as Niels Bohr once said. But I would like to quote a very famous British guy by the name of Paul Wilkinson. He says, "Fighting terrorism is like being a goalkeeper. You can make 100 brilliant saves, but the only shot people remember is the one that gets past you." And obviously, we know that it's taking only one chance to break so many successes along the way. I would like to, I don't know if I got the time, but I would like to briefly show you 3 examples of such threats. And I took it from 3 different films, obviously 2 films and 1 documentary. One of them is the 2-minute warning from 1976. It's going to be very, very brief. Can you hear it?
The Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Inside the stadium,
obviously, this is
91,000 cheering fans.
This is a feature from the 1970s.
An assassin waits.
Very famous one for those of you following the American cinema. But this is a threat that still exists. We're going to see a more current one, but something that more than 40 years ago was still exists. The second one is the Stade de France in November 2015, and while
it was a friendly.
Oh, sorry.
It was a friendly.
Can you please turn?
But at the game's 17th minute,
this is a terror attack. Luckily, no, I wouldn't say luckily,
They
because
thought it was a
obviously
fan's
lots of people
flair.
were killed
Played on.
in France. But
Oblivious
imagine
to
what
in
would happen
hindsight
if it
the
was
opening
inside
salvo
the stadium.
in what the French
And I'll be
president would later call
commenting on that
war.
later on, because this is one of the
Minutes
recent
later, there was a second.
problems
By
within
half-time, President
trying to
Hollande
fight
had been
terrorism
pushed away.
within the stadium, but
Towards the end
you
of the
just
game,
bring
they
the
started to
the
go.
problem or taking out the problems
People rushed
out
off
there.
the pitch,
So
huddling
we are familiar with that one. But the last one is quite a recent film. I don't know how many of you had a chance to see it, by the call of Final Score. This is something which is more recent.
The atmosphere is electric at the bowling ground tonight.
All right, let's do this.
Emotions running high in what promises to be a dramatic dogfight.
Let's get this show on the road.
Unfortunately, it's bringing lots of ideas from lots of terror groups. What can be done within sporting events.
Somewhere in this stadium is the
But obviously there are many examples of that sort. So I'm totally agreed with my colleagues here. There's no foolproof 100% solutions, but a 100% effort is required during obviously planning as well as during implementation stage of trying to stop terrorism in sports. I would like to refer to a very current threat, not just in sporting event, but in sporting event was hopeful. It happened in 2014, and I'm talking about the case of drones. In 2014, during the Serbia versus Albania football match in October 2014, the game was stopped because a drone entered the pitch. You all remember in England, what was it, a year ago, within the airport, exactly. And this is something which is in sporting events, something that can be happening. But this is just an example. So there are definitely improved stadium design and security, and we're all aware of how measures are being taken in order to try to protect stadiums. But I would like to point out one paradox that I was referring to earlier. Paradoxically, increased stadium security will present attractive terrorist targets outside the stadiums. And correct me if I'm wrong, in Manchester, that was something that exactly happened, something very similar, by the way, to what happened in Paris. So when we look at the whole pictures, it's still sports going to be a very attractive target for terrorists in the next few years, and hopefully we'll hear only about the savings and not the goals that are going to get in. Thank you very much.